Good morning and welcome to NICAR CRE Broker Forum. This is an opportunity for us to bring on presenters and provide valuable content to commercial practitioners. We have different content each month when we can. And then afterwards, we have a needs and wants section where everyone has an opportunity to advertise their needs and wants. So even if you have just listings, that's great, or a buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, we listen to all needs. And if you have something that you can really help other individuals in the group, we appreciate that. I do ask that everyone put their contact information in the chat. We do save it at the end. And then the presentation portion is recorded, and we do put it on the NICAR webpage, on the CRE Broker Forum page, as well as the NICAR YouTube, so that you can reference it later. If you have if you would like to present, or you know anyone that would be a great presenter to bring on hot commercial topics, always lovely to hear that. I didn't even introduce myself. My name's Teresa Mueller. I'm CEO of Trillium Real Estate. It's an international commercial brokerage. And I do this in collaboration with NICAR, NASBAR, as well as our surrounding associations, Heartland, Chicago Association, Realtors, Main Street. Everyone is welcome to participate. And whether you're a broker or not, if you're just wanting to learn, or if you do inspections, environmental, lender, everyone is welcome to join. We're here to support one another. So I encourage you to continue coming, and we're always looking for feedback. I would like to introduce our presenter, who comes from Costar. Rhea Stephen is a wealth of knowledge. She really can go in heavy into the data. She can also give you a little bit about her background, but she is going to talk about some of the asset classes here in the Chicagoland market. And we are going to hold off on questions until she's towards the end. You will have an opportunity to ask your questions, but if in the meantime you do have a question, please do put it in the chat, and I may or may not interrupt her. So if you could go ahead, Rhea, I would love to hear what you have to present to us today, and just give us a little bit of background about yourself before you start.
Yes, Senior Director of Market Analytics for the Costar Group. I basically I'm responsible for all the reports that are written in Costar, and I do thought leadership, and I do presentations. I cover office, multifamily, retail, and industrial space in the Chicago MSA. Before that, I worked for a boutique office firm, office brokerage, Bradford Allen. I was director of research there. I was also a broker, and I owned about 350 units all along the red line of multifamily. So I kind of have the research broker owner kind of perspective on a lot of things. So I will get started. So ever since I've been working here, I started about 3 years ago. I'm really just talking about how is Chicago going to, move into this new reality? And I call it kind of the great pivot. We're seeing a lot of redevelopment, repurposing of our commercial real estate for its highest and best use. Some hits like quantum computing, and then there's some misses. There have been some mega developments that haven't done as well, and then biolab space, and then there's legacy retail and industrial inventory. So when we look at Chicago, it is a legacy market, which has its pluses and minuses. But sometimes what that can happen, at least for Chicago, is that it can have our sales prices are lower than the rest of the nation. Generally speaking, that shift depends on what the market was, or the property type was, where that shift happened, but probably easily within the last 8 years. So we're seeing leasing is picking up across all asset types, and actual deals getting done, but we're seeing the square footages going down. So that's why we're going to say we're seeing it pick up, but then overall velocity. So if you actually add up the square feet that's had transactions, that's actually going down. So absorption, it's pretty steady for retail and industrial. we just don't have the kind of move outs that maybe you see in other parts of the country. When we look at multifamily, we don't really have, maybe there's some submarkets that have some oversupply issues, but generally we are in a situation of overabsorbed, which really means that we really need more inventory. So on the positive side for owners, that means we really do have a tight supply. And then the less bleeding for office, but it still needs tourniquet measures, just sort of like saying, we're still consistently, recording negative absorption, quarter over quarter, year over year. That's been going on for a while. But it just it's starting to flatline. And so what I mean by flatline is in the sense that we're seeing a lot of repurposing going on. So taking those things out of the marketplace is kind of creating a new balance for where absorption or vacancy, which is the ultimate measure of demand. Because sometimes absorption, it's usually defined as the ultimate measure, but I've learned to not trust absorption as much as vacancy rate. And the reason being is because you can have negative absorption, but if you have a vacancy rate of 4%, really it only has an opportunity to go, for vacancy to go up. It can't really go lower because of a structural kind of, measurements in the market. Rent growth, so it is lackluster to negative. It depends on how you look at the data, but still a leader across the country for multifamily since 22 Q4, and industrial rents have been staying above the U.S. average since the beginning of this year, and that has continued. So sales volume is we're seeing kind of an upswing going on. And I wrote on here 24 Q1, 24 Q2, but it really depends on what the market is. Some of them really bottomed out in Q3, and some of them actually in 2023. So price declines are decelerating. Yes, so we're still seeing price declines going down. It depends on the property type, blah, blah, blah. But cap rates really seem to be nearing their peaks. So really, especially when it comes to, office, the great basis reset is underway. We're just really seeing some only distressed properties crossing the finish line. And I would say it's been like that for a good year, if not longer. Probably I think the last time something really sold market was, it was 2022 with just down the street, the Bank of America tower. So expenditures and disposable income, they are running in tandem, as we can see here at 2024. When you have your, disposable income, it's really nice, right? When that is above your expenditures. And, what we saw with 2020, right? We had a big influx of cash kind of coming through. But why this is really kind of relevant is that we're still seeing, for a while there, we thought, people are making more money, they're more saving than we thought they were, which is why this is actually kind of a new number that we're looking at. But we're still really seeing the people who are non-asset type owners, renters, people who are living paycheck to paycheck, we're still really seeing, that population struggle. So here we're kind of looking at, where we're seeing, employment growth. We have the year over year change, and then we have the 5 year. And I really do like looking at the 5 year, although now we're kind of going to get into the 5 year. It's going to be COVID, right? So it's going to be 2020. So, maybe if I could change this to be 6 years or something, because we like to really kind of keep that 2020 benchmark. But we're really seeing some gains going on in manufacturing. We're still not at that level where we were in 2019 with manufacturing. And remember, this is by industry, not necessarily by job. So that could be somebody who works in the manufacturing industry could have an office job, right? Or could work in a distribution center. So it depends on really what the industry of that particular business is. We're seeing office using employment also going down, which is not helping certainly our office market. So this is a moving chart that I always have, which is just kind of showing how I started this maybe in 2022, just seeing how we're seeing that transportation warehousing jobs have been like kind of picking up, where manufacturing jobs have been but kind of like losing. But we're starting to see that trend just in 2024, where we're seeing manufacturing jobs kind of ticking up and transportation and warehousing jobs ticking down. Remember, that depends on the industry, right? So we could still see industrial space hiring transportation and warehousing people, but they are in that sector. So transportation and warehousing might be more like the 3PLs, third-party logistics. Okay, so Chicago builds, we're really seeing, like, compared to the nation, Chicago really does kind of have a just-in-time inventory. As you can see, so looking at this chart, I don't know if everybody knows what the term absorption means, but it's basically a measure of move in and move out. So if you have more tenants moving in than moving out, then it's positive absorption. And then if you have more moving out, then it's negative absorption. So if you look at this, even in 2020, for the year, it was still up, right? And then we see 2021 and 2022, we're seeing, that absorption has actually, and 2024, we see absorption outpacing deliveries, right? So that's where you're seeing our vacancy rate actually going lower, kind of establishing a new, equilibrium, post 2020. But we're seeing as the nation, its vacancy rate is still ticking upwards. That should be changing soon, because we're seeing construction pipelines across the country, starting to contract. But, Chicago was definitely ahead of the game when it comes to having a lower vacancy rate. So when we're looking at development, I kind of made this chart, like I just made this yesterday, and just looking at where we're seeing like the Chicago average and the national average. So with you can see where all the growth is, and then the Western Kane County, actually, it goes up to 58%, but it's only 293 additional units. It's just a smaller market. When you look at North Will County, however, which is about 9% of its inventory expanding, that's 1,000 units, right? So that's obviously a lot more of an impact, at least looking at it from a gross perspective, in gross meaning numbers. So when we're looking at this, all these different counties, right? But then you have DuPage County. Then you have Cook County, which is, the one in the top 10, Des Plaines, Arlington Heights corridor. That is actually below the national index. And then if you look at Chicago, it's kind of being at a 1.5% of inventory expanding. All of those other markets, we've got about 36, 39 markets. All the other ones are going to be below the Chicago average, and clearly below the national average too, as a percentage of inventory. So Chicago vacancy by star rating, this can be a little bit misleading. So when you look at charts from CoStar, really the period I really want you to look at is 15 to 19. That's kind of like our pre-pandemic benchmark. And also because the data, this is when we bought apartments.com. So the data just became a lot more solid, right? So if we're going to look at it here, where this benchmark is for 4 and 5 stars, so we can see it even with, a lot of, some construction peaks, we're still seeing that we are probably, about at its equilibrium marker for where it was before. Okay. Oh, I forgot to delete that page, but I just took the shot. So just kind of give you some context here. So stabilized vacancy, unlike other property types, when you have multifamily, you generally don't pre-lease it before it delivers, right? Like you can do in office and industrial and retail, right? So usually people like they see it, they want to touch, feel, and then they sign the lease, right? So the stabilized vacancy, it's really a fantastic thing. What we do at CoStar is we give new properties a year to lease up. So that's what the stabilized vacancy is. So if you look at that measure of stabilized vacancy compared to, where it was before, you can see it's a big difference. It's a difference, not big. It looks like it's maybe 50 basis points. But if you look at the overall vacancy, that's clearly like 100 basis points below the overall vacancy, which really just kind of says maybe we don't need that much time to lease these properties up. And then here we have mid-tier apartments. So this is like the 3 stars. Or your Class B, on, kind of creating this new structural vacancy rate. So it's very interesting because if you look at it in the before times, right, we're seeing them kind of like there's just not that much of a give. And now we're seeing more give. Well, the real reason for that is because we are seeing more Class B property built. And it's on a national scale. So remember what a Class B here you might think it's a Class A, but you have to compare it to the national level. So the national level, a Class A is going to have a luxury unit would be having a pool, right? Or the gym or an elevator, certain stories, right? So we're seeing a lot more of, but this kind of development, and that's why we have this delta here, which kind of just shows you that actually we're seeing the 3 stars becoming part of the build. So when we're looking at the leaders and the laggards in year-over-year asking rent growth, we do see that Chicago is above the national average, about 2.5 times. And so here we're looking at the leaders of rent, the top 5, and then we have the bottom 5. So even in our bottom 5, still beating out the national average. South Chicago, definitely a laggard. We also have a lot of affordable housing down there, some new builds, which is a good thing. But then that's competition with market rate, and so that can it can have a trickle effect, even though they're in theory different populations, but not always. So this is just kind of showing that it's 2.5 times the U.S. average. Here we're looking at 2.6, whereas the national average is about 1%. And this is the longest run that we've seen. There was another one here, like in 2007, seeing some rent. There was, 3 years that, 4 here that Chicago was beating the national average. But it's just pretty impressive that we've that we're kind of maintaining the streak, and it really is the controlled development.
So are we talking just solely Metro Chicago, the city?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Yes. So when we say Chicago, we don't mean Chicago proper. We mean the MSA. So that goes all the way up to Kenosha, Northwest Indiana, out to DeKalb, and then not including Kankakee, but pretty close, for the southern border.
And to be clear, that if you dissected Chicago versus suburbs, some of these metrics may be different. Yes.
That's funny that, yes, I had some slides on that and I actually took them out because Cook County is definitely a different beast for sure. The last time I looked, Cook County is, so Cook County is 60%. Of our MSA. So with it losing jobs and with it losing what's the word I'm looking for? Population, like that affects the whole MSA. And honestly, it affects the whole region because Chicago is so much larger than the other Great Lakes market. So it brings down the other Great Lake markets too. But we also are a $1 trillion GDP. So, it's going to have a lot more of an effect because it's just that much bigger.
Thank you.
Sure. So, I'm just going to go through this quickly, but retail sales, just kind of seeing that retail has been really remaining strong. We saw some, that we saw we use Oxford Economics. They actually changed their forecast because they were really surprised to see that the consumer spending has, really, what's the word? Has kept pace. I'm kind of like surprised about that. I personally have also seen a lot of digitally native brands, so it's kind of really new to market. Deals kind of coming through when I'm looking at leases coming on. But there are the store closures. So remember that big surplus, those checks that we got, from 2020? Well, that money is starting to, is spent. So those retailers that were probably maybe didn't have the best balance sheets, they're starting to, now we're really seeing them kind of hit in a big way. And I mentioned about the owners, especially non-asset owners, consumer balance sheets, they are continuing to show signs of stress. And there's also like a lot of, market participants and media sources, they're just, noting that, costs are going up as, and so that's kind of like affecting abilities for, for retailers to, make a profit. So that's just some of those kind of headwinds. So when we're looking at this, last time I showed this screen, I don't even know if I ever showed this one, but a lot of, like mid-year last year when I was looking at the screen, a lot of them on the wave of bankruptcies was on the right side, that they just really weren't Chicago markets. And, one of the real reasons of Chicago's strength is its barrier to entry. So a lot of times, retailers don't come here because they look at population growth, or, or they're more chasing, exponential growth, which we clearly do not have, right? But if we're looking on this right side, a lot of these are now turning into Chicago companies, right? We have Walgreens, we have Big Lots. That was, last time I looked, it was like 200,000 square feet. And move outs, we have Family Dollar, we have Party City. I calculated, I think it was crazy. I think I saw like 800,000 square feet of Party City closings. I was really surprised to see that. I don't think we have Cons. I don't know about Route 21, but we do have Advanced Auto, 7-Eleven, 99-cent stores, American Freight, Macy's, Express. So we're starting to see kind of more of these really that could potentially hitting the Chicago market. But we also have going on in Chicago, we have the Aldi's growing, Dollar General, right? So it's still kind of that very similar to the Family Dollar. And then we have 7-Eleven. So what's going on here? They're probably moving into different kind of formats. So it looks like it's a net going to be a positive. Maybe they're going away from freestanding. I don't really, know what that situation is, truthfully. So let's see here. So this is just kind of showing you visually, like the amount of store closings, right? Just literally more than double from what we saw in 2023. All right, but Chicago's retail market isn't oversupplied. So, outside of you're looking at the malls, and the mall one is a little quirky, right? Because we're seeing a lot of repurposing of that space. But the real important line, if I were you, I would look at, just like the red one, right? I'm using my fingers. All right, so like looking at the red one, right? We're seeing how availability rates have been tracking downward over the last 10 years. And then general retail is our largest sector, right? So that's really what's driving this. But we're seeing that power centers, they weren't doing that well for a while, but we're starting to see that kind of stabilize. So that's a good thing. Okay. So I look at this. I did keep this. All right. So Cook County, record low under construction retail pipeline, having 331 square feet that's under construction. This is the lowest level. And I think I saw one lower, but it was like really way in the past. It was like 2004 or something. But here I took out Cook County. So, and we're looking at this, actually, yes, it's low, but it's not the lowest on record. Okay. So if we're looking at other counties. So Chicago supply, demand, and availability. I like to look at availability over vacancy for retail because, well, retail brokers is their data in our system. Sometimes they go in and kind of manipulate it. But if you have a lease for if you have space for lease, you have space for lease. You are going to advertise it on our platform. And so that's where we're really kind of seeing, this like every year, every quarter, it just seems like it's a new record low for availability rate. And here you can even see completions are in negative territory for 2024. So that means we demolished more than we actually brought to market. And so, we're seeing, absorption, most of these, like what we have 3 years out of the past 11 that have positive, only 3 have negative absorption. So market asking rent growth. So we're just kind of seeing that, the mall kind of going up and down. Like I said, that one's a little bit of a harder read, but if you're looking at this, we're still we're in positive territory. But if you compare it, to the U.S. average, we are definitely below it. It's not on the screen, but I could tell you the U.S. average is about 2%. Oh, here we go. Look at this. So 40%, right? So we're 40% below the U.S. average. This is not surprising at all. We have older inventory, which is not going to command top rents. We don't have a lot of, we have we don't really have speculative construction outside of maybe medical office, medical retail, medtail. So we're not really seeing speculative just construction, and we're not just the retailers that come here. They really are chasing our population, but they're not chasing our growth, right? So looking at it, industrial, the one thing that I wrote a piece about this, it's just kind of like about the Chicago market. And it looked like it was just a love letter to distribution, So 25% of our market is, part of the logistics industry. So 25% of people who work here have something to do with logistics, which I think is really impressive. And when we think about, just the whole Midwest, we are the hub for that. And we are seeing that 3PL space has softened, and that has softened with projections about consumer spending not really needing that warehouse space for manufacturers. But conversely, the data doesn't really, it's really kind of hard to parse out, but I am really seeing a lot of manufacturers, coming to the market, for the distribution space, and honestly, and for some more specialized space like cold storage, or actually maybe a manufacturing facility. So I am seeing that kind of coming through in the data. So the weakness is really about that what we're seeing demand, it is really for the newer properties. And so that's why like markets like O'Hare, which we all know is like really, it's like the industrial market, right? But when you look at it, it's got a vacancy rate of 4%, but it's been negative absorption, for a while now. And a lot of that is just because the inventory is just so legacy, and there's just not room to build. So there is the small bay, right? Like kind of those smaller properties. Wow, they're just really tight. It's like 3%. It's just not. So you might see negative absorption. When you see that, really pay attention to where the vacancy rate is, right? So this is just kind of looking at Chicago, compared to the nation. So here, we did have that deliveries did outpace absorption for Q4. So that's why we did see vacancy rate tip up. And then you could also see that, about 22 Q4, that's when we saw that switch, that Chicago became tighter than the nation, or a lot of markets have been, overbuilding. That's my opinion. So, but you're also going to notice, right? Then we started to see actually rent growth kind of change about a year ago, Q1. So logistics dominate our supply and demand. And so if you're going to like look at this, once again, I want you, if you're, I only go back to 2019 on this chart because I just want to make it visual, but you could see right here, we're still below at least 2019, right? Because I always try to look for like that equilibrium. Where do we find that supply and demand? And that's called a structural vacancy. All right, so data centers. So data centers are really interesting. So if you do have a CoStar subscription, I'll just give you this little tip on how to search for it. You're going to check off office, industrial, and flex data, and then go into the data housing, and then check those. So that way we can look at all of them, right? So you can see the vacancy rate is, has been historically, pretty low because they're generally built to suits. And that's what we're seeing in these numbers, right? So we're seeing kind of like those built to suit situations. But in 2025, expecting that there's actually going to be some speculative space, like really kind of coming online. And that's kind of fascinating, I think. It's just it's a new world, right? So market asking rent year over year, logistics really leads the show in market rent, even though their rents are generally lower than the specialized and the flex. But that's kind of like, so we're seeing that like average, what are we looking at? It's probably going to be about the 3% mark. All right, so how am I with time, Teresa? Oh, I'm way over. I'm always over. Do you want me to keep going?
Just go a few more minutes and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, so I'm just going to get to the things people care about for, so CTA ridership. So I did this screen last week. So we see it going year over year, it's down 20%. But if you looked at the week before, it was up 17%. So I'm just kind of seeing that. But overall, 53% of 2019 ridership is what, we're seeing. And for me, the Castle data says 43%. Truthfully, I prefer APTA. I think which is a great site to use for transportation because it really does seem to follow like what's happening for demand for office. So when we're looking at leasing volume trend, we look at Chicago. We are over here in the recovering, so we're below the average, but we're at least above 2023. So absorption, yes, we're still in negative territory, almost 4 million square feet negatively absorbed. But if we look at, medical office, you could see that medical office at least is in balance with its historical average, with its pre-pandemic benchmark. So this is year over year asking rent growth, but this is the thing that I just think is really important to see is that if we actually adjust it for inflation, we have been in negative territory for 4 years. So except for like a little blip, good for 1 and 2 stars. All right. So the last thing I just really want to lead you with is kind of see where cap rates are going. Chicago's cap rates are always about, I want to say about 50 to 60, sometimes even 100 basis points above the national average. That would probably be true when it comes to office. But you just see how stable retail is, right? So retail is no longer that stepchild. And one of the things, if you're going to look at trends, and I just did a screenshot from the office, is that you could see that office sales like started to bottom out here. And then a quarter later, we saw prices starting to increase. So we're even kind of seeing that going forward here. We've got this, sales of like kind of bottomed out, a little bit of a lag, but here we're seeing a bottom out of prices. So maybe this will turn around. Who knows, right? But generally, what we see is multifamily leads, right? So here they actually go in tandem. We're seeing this price going down, volume going down, and then price going, and then volume going up, and the price is going up. Ignore the 2025 because that's just how I had to take the screen, being new in the quarter. So here we got a bottoming out of prices. Then we start to see this uptick, and then we see the industrial going forward. The price is actually bottoming out a quarter later, and then we see the spike. And then retail is a little bit different. You know, we had the spike was like kind of like lower, but now we're really kind of getting into a nice like equilibrium stage. And when we're looking at investors, this is generally where we're seeing those spending over 50 million. So, you know, office is going to see users. We're seeing a lot of this, entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial spirit kind of coming into the office. So like, you know what, I'm going to run this like a business. So there's a lot of chatter about that, whether that's a good or bad news, but with prices this low, we're bringing everybody, you know, to the table. And then this is looking at the CMBS delinquency rate. So that's clearly some struggle. And then this is where we have maturing office loans. So 2026, we're going to probably see a lot of dispositions before that time. And that's it. Sorry I went over.
Great.
Kind of my brand.
If everyone could just use the reaction button to raise your hand, and then I'll just go in the order of any questions that you may have. I'm going to ask two up front. First, personally, are you still a broker and transacting either for yourself or anyone else? And then second, does CoStar work with any economic develop groups and or like Intersect Illinois in terms of bringing business to Illinois / Chicagoland area?
I would say they, to answer the second question first, I would say they more use us. So they look at our data. You know, we don't work with them. Like that's, we're told to not be like the Better Business Bureau. We're supposed to just be neutral. It's just very hard because Chicago just gets the shaft all the time in the media. So it's really hard for me to just not, you know, kind of say, look, let's just all take a deep breath, you know, on that. And I do still have my license, but I really just use it for referrals or, you know, if I ever decide to buy a house or a 3-flat or something, but I just keep it active.
Uh-huh. How many doors do you have?
How many doors? I don't own anything now. I rent now. But I sold my house in 2021 and I've just been a renter. So.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. I can continue asking questions if other people do not have questions. When you were preparing for this, you know, I know you prepare for lots of different presentations, and I specifically said, hey, let's go over the different asset classes in the Chicagoland area. Was there anything that was very surprising to you?
You know, no, that's actually the surprising thing that there wasn't. So like, for example, I did look at, I met with Cook County Assessor's Office last week. So I was looking at a lot of things with Cook County, and then because I did take slides out. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, was looking at, you know, this whole, so there are 2 counties that have been losing population. That's DuPage County and Cook County. And of course, you know, Cook County, as I said, is 60% of the market. Well, DuPage County is 10%. But, and this isn't surprising only because I learned this last quarter was really, it's Naperville and Arlington Heights, I thought was going against trends because they have really strong retail markets. And so like when I look at the development out there for retail, like it's just kind of humming away. And I was surprised by this, not only because of, you know, population growth, but more importantly to me is that we have this, that we say high income areas are doing better for retail, you know, chasing people who have money. But I was just like, well, I said to the national director, I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense because where the average salaries are $250,000 a year or $175 a year, I'm really not seeing strong demand for retail. If anything, it's pretty lackluster. And he just said, oh, Rhea, you know, Chicago's MSA has some really wealthy areas. And so really that sweet spot is the average, is that $100,000 per year, which that would be Naperville and that would be Arlington Heights. So, because you're kind of like, you're chasing that middle, like that, to us, it's like a middle market, right? But you're chasing that high income, at least has disposable income, but you're not chasing the cachet of, maybe, Oak Street.
Mhm. Okay. Peter, you have a question?
I'm looking at this chart you have up here in the 26. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just said hi because I remember.
I'm looking at this chart that is in front of us, the office loans. 2026, it doubles with the maturing office loans that are going to come online. What is your thought?
CMBS.
What's going to happen with these loans, whether extended, pretend, or what's your thoughts?
We have seen a lot of much more like this, the black swan of COVID, especially on the office market, right? It's just so unpredictable. But what we've seen is we have seen a lot of extensions, and because banks have realized they don't want to own them. But at the same time, we've seen some institutional buyers that are just like, I'm out. I don't care, whatever it takes. I want this off my balance sheet. So, we have been seeing it, but there has been talk about that 2026 might just be a little bit different. Like if they're still bleeding at 2026, maybe they'll let them go. But we have seen a lot of extensions heretofore. So it probably will still happen. It just might not happen to the degree that it has been happening. That's a long way of saying that, but.
Thank you. I have two more questions.
Sure.
If nothing else, the last two questions I have are based on combing over the data, what do you see as the biggest risk in the Chicagoland area? And if you could please end on a positive note. You're not laughing, are you?
No, the biggest risk. Wow, like I don't have a crystal ball on that, but the biggest risk, I guess, is just it's a pat answer, but it's always uncertainty. Is always the biggest risk. So if you don't know what's going on, you're not going to buy and you're not going to sell. And so uncertainty is always the biggest risk. There are, of course, always going to be those who say anywhere but Chicago. But then there's a lot of companies that are kind of coming out. They're just seeing that Chicago isn't going anywhere. It's still the third, or maybe soon by 2030, the fourth largest MSA, but it's still a very large MSA. It's not going anywhere. It's a very diverse economy. When I think about the positive, and I actually just wrote a story about this, about three stories. One is the one that was just kind of, about Chicago's strength. But I also wrote about, what's going on in the development cycle. And the quantum computing on the South Side is really going to be a game changer, for sure. We have, Chase is staying at the Chase Tower, and we do have Google. I mean, I do read about them, that they're, quietly looking to sublet some of that space, but still, like, Google wanting to come into the Central Loop is really just saying a lot about wanting to get into not only just like it's the hub of our economy, the Central Loop. So that's really a good vote of confidence. But I would say the South Side, like I'm seeing a lot of really positive things happening there. And it's not just about the quantum computing, although that's a big part of it. It's, just seeing more distribution space going there too. And some interesting specialized space going on the South Side.
Thanks. When I go everywhere as a Chicago cheerleader, what I like to remind everyone, aside from us being a great place culturally and an educational, very highly educated people throughout the Chicagoland area, What we fail to remember is we are the largest fresh body of water, and we are a logistics hub, with O'Hare, all the train lines. So Chicago's not going away, despite people liking, the media and what happens politically. It's certainly not going away. So it's still a place to invest and thrive, right?
Right. Well, the quantum computing came to the south side for the fresh water. So, right. Yeah, used for cooling.
So thank you very much for this presentation, and the slides and presentation will be on the NICAR CRE Broker page as well as YouTube. I would appreciate feedback afterwards via email, call, etc. We are always welcoming presenters so that we can provide relevant content for all the practitioners that partake, whether it be in this presentation or through NICAR. And I appreciate everyone's attendance. We will be ending the recording, and then we allow for a networking session afterwards. So thank you, everyone. Teresa Mueller, Trillium Real Estate, please contact me anytime. Ciao for now.